Barbie begins with the Space Odyssey scene, which tells us a story about the evolution of human consciousness, from crude pre-technological enterprise of Australopithecines to abstract mental consciousness of Homo sapiens, that is, smart humans. The monolith in Space Odyssey describes the rectangularity and Platonic geometrical solidity that has no analog to it in the real world of curvilinearity, flux, and becoming. However, the monolith, and as the symbol of the Euclidean space, is something that exists within the mind of smart humans, who can now boast abstract realm of principles and ideas. Bone in Space Odyssey, as opposed to the rectangular monolith, is curvilinear and crude. It is not modified and filtered through the Euclidean geometry. Then in the Barbie, we're going to see that the protagonist, the Barbie, will substitute the monolith as a symbol of abstract idea, a Platonic solid, which basically transcends and substitutes the Great Mother archetype, which is symbolized by the Venus figurines, who are all about curvilinearity and circularity and fertility. However, Barbie being now an abstract idea, lacking genitalia, she's not bound to Earth and fertility, which is explained by why now children do away with child dolls, which symbolize this fertility and motherhood. So, new understanding of femininity as two-dimensional abstract principle, filtered and modified through the masculine lens of culture and geometry, will basically substitute the old motherhood, fertility, Venus figurine archetype. Now, the film then will tell us a story of how a Barbie, which is an abstract idea, an abstract principle, who is decontextualized from a world of becoming and flux, will be inspired into our world of becoming, mortality, and death. Hence, right now, Barbie is a type of entity whose essence precedes her existence, meaning that she's thought out before she's thrown into existence. But then Barbie will basically turn upside down this ontological condition, whereby, in the end, her existence will precede her essence, whereby she will get this freedom to choose her own life. Now, the Barbie Land, which basically follows the scene of the Space Odyssey, basically constitutes a world that we can term as a pure space without time. This is a world of extension, of pure present, where there is no calendar, there is no temporicity, there is no change, no flux, there is no room for creative impulse, no room for discontinuity, and so on and so forth. This is a pure present, pure extension, where everything is set. Objects have no entrails, they have no substance, they are pure eidos. The only thing that they have is pure appearance, okay? And the connection between things are set and reduced to a couple of variables. Barbie Land is basically a computer program which exists in the mode of presence at hand, which Martin Heidegger describes to be a mode of being of things that are decontextualized and uprooted and put in this form of Cartesian XY coordinate system. And now, one thing that is noteworthy here is that the life of Barbie takes place within the mode of being of the they. And they is a term coined by Martin Heidegger, das Man in German, which describes the mode of public being. Now, in the mode of the they, human being is completely immersed into social expectations and social norms. Human life is structured according to the they as the symbol of social expectation and social norm. You do not have your authentic self, but rather your whole point of existence is to completely minimize your distance with the they, so that you can be completely saturated with the mind of the they, the publicness. To quote Heidegger, we take pleasure as they take pleasure. We read, see, and judge about literature and art as they see and judge. Likewise, we shrink back from the great mass as they shrink back. Everyone is the other and no one is himself. The they, which supplies the answer to the who of everyday Dasein, is the nobody, to whom every Dasein has already surrendered in being among one another. Now, the main constitutive feature of the they and everydayness of human existence, according to Heidegger, is fallenness. In the mode of fallenness, you are completely immersed into everyday affairs, whereby you are unable to zoom out from your everyday being and to contemplate your own existence. Now, the interesting parallel that is worth mentioning here is that in the mode of fallenness, basically they tries to keep itself into this everydayness simply because it flees in the face of primordial anxiety and in the face of death. Basically, they do not want to accept death as death, but rather it treats it as a statistical fact, as an empirical phenomenon, which just basically awaits you as a wall, as an ending. But they never leaves death as something that is co-present in your life. As we are going to see, according to Heidegger, basically you starting to live an authentic life is connected with the ability to confront death in its existential sense. Now, before getting to the death aspect, it's worth noting that the fallenness is reinforced by things like idle talk, ambiguity, and curiosity, which are basically constitutive features of fallenness. Idle talk refers to this everyday vacuous chatter, which basically conceals and covers up genuine existential phenomena. Idle talk basically refers to this everyday gossip about existentially vacuous matters, the journals and scandals and entertainment industry and so on and so forth, basically to somehow relieve yourself from experiencing your own being. This is something that we witness in Barbie Land, where every conversation and every encounter is set and behaves according to a specific rule of the they. Now, it's interesting to point out that the they that Martin Heidegger is talking about is not the they of the traditional society, but the they of the megalopolis, of industrial city-state, like New York, let's say. Now, megalopolis here is important because basically what it constitutes is this collection of people who come from completely different cultural backgrounds, who are uprooted and decontextualized from their soil so that they can come to this pure extension of a social experiment of the city-state where they can only pursue a material gain and career. As Oswald Spengler, German philosopher, points out, the factman of megalopolis is completely devoid of spiritual depth. The only thing that he cares is to champion the expectations of the they. Now, the rules and the laws of megalopolis, in virtue of its being uprooted and timeless and being purely spatial, is like a board game, and therefore its rules are conventional and arbitrary. That's why in Barbie Land, no one has a private identity. Everyone is either a Ken or a Barbie. Now, the fact that there are different types of Barbies, let's say a doctor Barbie or a firefighter or an attorney, does not confer a unique identity onto them. According to Heidegger, even being a lawyer or a doctor is also a mode of being of the they, whereby even in your choice of being a businessman, let's say, is a type of being which tries to comport itself to the business they, that adopts the styles of the business day, the fashion of the business day. If you are a doctor, you will have to adopt the fashion and style and appearance of the doctor day, and so on and so forth. So therefore, it is not something that you genuinely chose for yourself, but it's something that you just liked in its appearance, so that you can now comport yourself to the they of the doctors, or they of the lawyers, or they of the politicians, and so on and so forth. Now, stereotypical Barbie is a culminative symbol of megalopolitan mode of being. She is devoid of any particulars. She just represents this abstract notion of womanhood. The reason why I call it civilizational is because it is purely spatial but atemporal. In other words, the identity of maleness or femaleness or of humanity in the civilizational mode is basically mathematical in its rigidity and abstract. You can basically analyze the life of Barbie and squeeze it in a mathematical formula with ease. However, naturally, as you would expect, human life should be so complex that it need not be or could not be squeezed into a mathematical formula. In other words, such a being is mathematical in its rigidity than its lack of history and personal experience, along with the spiritual depth. Barbie or Ken, in their simplicity, can be easily squeezed into a mathematical formula. Now, naturally, you would assume that human life has nothing to do with the life of the Barbie land, whereby human life is so complex that it could never be put into a mere mathematical equation. It can't be so rigid and abstract and set into a particular schema whereby you can just reduce humanity to a particular variables and social expectation. And that's why Martin Heidegger designates human mode of existence as Dasein, which translates as being there. There, then, describes the context within which humans acquire their meaning, describing the fact that you do not begin existence as a form of isolated, self-sufficient entity, but rather in every type of being, you're always there along with others in the world. So there denotes this context within which humans exist, or exists, as Heidegger likes to put it, emphasizing its dynamic being, where Ek-sistence describes a being outside of itself. So Dasein is a human mode of existence which can only be questioned with howness as opposed to whatness. Now, this Dasein, according to Heidegger, has two modes of existence, the inauthentic and authentic mode of existence. And as you have expected, the inauthentic mode of existence has to do with the mode of existence that is saturated in the they, in the public life. Now, Barbie land and the life of Barbie is purely atemporal and ahistorical. It lives in the pure present, where, like a computer program, it runs on its own time, whereby it's not a time, but a series of self-recurring events. It's a pure present. Now, one primary marker that differentiates authentic and inauthentic mode of being is the confrontation and understanding of the death. Now, according to the they, death is just a statistical fact. It is an empirical phenomenon that has no peculiarity to it. It is just a wall that awaits you in the end. So death has no uniqueness to it. Death is understood as a mere termination of your experience. So Heidegger takes public understanding of death to be a demise, whereas the authentic understanding of death will be an existential death. An existential death, as opposed to the death of the they, that is the demise, basically is co-present and co-determines your life in every single instance. In the authentic mode of being, you live your death. You confront your death as the possibility of impossibility of your being. And death belongs particularly to you, meaning that it is your death and not a death that you share with other people. Death not as a universal statistical fact, but death that is unique and particular to your life. So basically, they always try to evade death by coping mechanisms such as idle talk, curiosity, preoccupying yourself with existentially vacuous matters, keeping up with Kardashians, and so on and so forth. So in the authentic mode of Dasein, your understanding of death shifts from demise to an existential death, which is not a wall that awaits you in an undefined future, but rather something that you get to experience in your everyday life. Now, interestingly, the magnum opus of Martin Heidegger's work, Being in Time, mentions time as the primary constitutive feature of being, where being acquires its beingness in time. And that's why, basically, Barbie will mention death and the fear of death when she's talking about time, namely how every day is the same, where she's just happy today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and so on and so forth. And then, after she basically experiences this self-recurring nature of the spatial time, which is not temporal but spatial, she then gets to basically experience death. And when she mentions death, what happens is that the coping mechanism of the they activates, when basically Dasein is forced back into its inauthenticity, whereby she's going to forget about death as something that is co-present in her life. Now note that, according to Heidegger, Dasein has an innate proclivity to immerse itself back into the they. It basically doesn't want to confront death, which results from experiencing a primordial anxiety. So you are always trying to prevent yourself from confronting this type of primordial anxiety that will then basically be inflicted on Barbie, as we're going to see. Now, after her confrontation with death, that is with temporality and mortality, basically whereby she's spat out from a spatial mode of being into the temporal mode of being, her life suddenly changes. She gets to experience emotions, care, concern, guilt, emotions, embarrassment, care, I already mentioned. All of those things that are peculiar to human mode of existence basically invades her being. So here, when she wakes up and starts to experience things, it is basically a transformation from left hemisphere mode of being, whereby everything is dead, static, and decontextualized, to the right hemisphere mode of being, which is contextualized and sensual. Now, apart from her awakening to her senses, which points to your temporal mode of being, two aspects are noteworthy that has to do with right hemisphere mode of being, the mode of being of time and temporality. Namely, the fact that now her feet is flattened and grounded, and the fact that she got a cellulite. Now, flattening of the feet has to do with grounding yourself back to earth, back to contextuality, back to the earthly flow of becoming and flux, as opposed to the abstract layer of space. So now she's grounded back into basically a contextual being. On the other hand, cellulite is a symbol of discontinuity, because what we need to understand is that in the megalopolitan mode of being, everything is spatialized and industrialized into becoming something that is reproducible and universal. Meaning that, for example, pantyhose or stockings, what they does is that they homogenize human skin, whereby legs of females are being homogenized into pencil nylons, whereby in the act of homogenizing skin, you are depriving skin of its history, texture, and discontinuity, where everything becomes continuous and smooth. However, cellulite, on the other hand, is the symbol of discontinuity, which has to do with, temporal mode of being, where everything is not smooth and continuous and linear and perfect. After her confrontation with death, primordial anxiety grips her life, and now she needs to fix herself. And it's very important because the moment someone is disconnected from the mode of the they, the collective coping mechanism is activated to somehow fix that human, because the aim of the they is to minimize the distance between human and the they, so that everyone can be saturated in the collective mode of being. So now she has to go to the weird Barbie so that she can be fixed from the possibility of turning her life into authentic mode of being. Now, according to Heidegger, the first thing that happens to authentic Dasein is the possibility to own your life, to make decision about your life, not in keeping with the they, but in keeping with yourself. Although, all while maintaining that there is no such thing as pure yourself, which is completely isolated from the web and nexus of social network. So then Barbie is confronted with the choice of choosing a sandal or high heels. High heels here symbolizing this abstract Platonic realm, where she gets to immerse herself back into the they, into the abstract world of the space. And on the other hand, we have sandal, which in its loose structure and earthly texture symbolizes the world of becoming, flux, and mortality. And by the way, I can't blame Barbie that she chose high heels. I would also choose high heels over sandals. No offense to Germans, but Now, as Heidegger points it out, they basically disburdens you of your responsibility to confront your own death. You get to outsource your responsibility to the they. So naturally, Dasein always seeks that comfort of the they. So, it's expectable that Barbie will always try to basically circle back to the mode of the they. So Barbie then gets to the real world, where she gets to experience the very being of Dasein, which is being in the world. Where in the world doesn't mean the spatial insideness of the world. It's not being in as in being in the spatial container, but being in the world, according to Martin Heidegger, is being alongside with others. And here she basically experiences the minds and ecstatic lives of other people, their concerns, their happiness, let's say their sorrow, and so on and so forth, whereby she gets to experience the discontinuity of different emotions, different concerns, as opposed to her homogeneous life of Barbie Land, where everything is expected and there is no place for discontinuity, which is then followed by her encounter with the old lady, who symbolizes this mortality and becoming, as opposed to the static being. This is very important because what we see here is that Barbie is being infused with the principle of care, which for Heidegger describes the primary existential structure of Dasein. Care is chosen as such for Heidegger because everything you do, irrespective of what your profession is or what you're doing at a given moment, the things that you do or things with which you engage should matter to you one way or another. It is impossible for you to engage in something if it doesn't matter to you. You might not like what you're doing, but here care describes not this form of, let's say, loving what you're doing, but this primordial abstract care as a relational mode of being, whereby you are always related to something else. Now, care for Heidegger constitutes this glue that binds Dasein to its referential totality, that makes possible a being of Dasein as being in the world. Care basically stands prior to any concrete concern in one's life. In order for one to be in the world, engaged in tasks, projecting yourself in future, identifying or understanding yourself one way or another, is possible because things matter to you. And as we're going to see, this invasion of the principle of care in her life, where she starts to genuinely be concerned with matters that are completely alien to her, will animate her and throw her into the mode of authentic life. Now here we need to recount the myth which basically inspired Heidegger to choose care as the primary structure of Dasein. So, as the Roman myth goes, Care, the Roman goddess, she was crossing the river and she scooped up the ground and molded it into a human being. However, she needed something to inspire that carcass of earth to animate it. Then Jupiter, the sky god, arrived and infused this carcass made out of clay and ground. It infused and inspired it with life, animating it, whereby you get the spirit and the form in which that spirit is trapped. So basically then these three deities got into a dispute about how to name this creature. Basically Care, the sky god, Jupiter and the earth, three of them, they all wanted to name that creature after their name. And to settle this dispute, Kronos arrived, the principle of time and temporality, which is noteworthy here, and he basically settled this dispute by a following rule, namely that when this creature would die, its form, its carcass, would go back to Earth, its spirit would go to the sky, because it belongs to the sky, who infused it with the spirit, but while it is alive, it will belong to the Care. That's very important here. And basically the name was chosen to be Homo, which comes from humus, the earth. And this is very important that, namely, when human lives in its temporal life, it belongs to Care, which describes an ecstatic life. Where it doesn't belong to either sky or earth, but it always exists in the interplay of those forces, not being a static object like a Barbie, but being a processual, ecstatic entity, which you cannot question with whatness again, but you can only question with howness, how it can be, as opposed to what it is. So after that scene, we get to witness the most Heideggerian part of the film, as after that scene, the film descends into a usual cliche political feminism and social justice things and so on and so forth. But in that scene, it is a culmination of its philosophical part, where Barbie basically expresses that she feels fear which is not directed at a particular object. And at that moment, a middle-aged woman interjects and tells her that what she experiences is not fear, but an anxiety. That's very important here, because that is exactly how Heidegger describes primordial anxiety, which is completely different from fear and which is a gateway for Dasein to enter its authentic mode of being, whereby it can contemplate death and its own mortality. And we need to read how Heidegger differentiates anxiety from fear so that this connection can become clear. Now, although Heidegger describes the difference between anxiety and fear in the same manner as he does in his later essay, What is Metaphysics, this description that we can read in the essay, What is Metaphysics, is more spot on. The paragraph goes, "By this anxiety, we do not mean the quite common anxiousness, ultimately reducible to fearfulness, which all too readily comes over us. Anxiety is basically different from fear. We become afraid in the face of this or that particular being that threatens us in this or that particular respect. Fear in the face of something is also in each case a fear for something in particular, because fear possesses this trait of being fear in the face of and fear for. He who fears and is afraid is captive to the mood in which he finds himself. Striving to rescue himself from this particular thing, he becomes unsure of everything else and completely loses his head." That's very important because a particular fear directed at a particular object won't allow you to basically disconnect yourself from your lostness, from your fallenness, and immersion into the realm of everydayness. Whereas the anxiety, which is directed at nothingness, it basically helps you to disconnect yourself and zoom out from your everyday being, which is absolutely important for you to enter the authentic mode. Then, basically, Heidegger continues, "Anxiety doesn't let such confusion arise. Much to the contrary, a peculiar calm pervades it. Anxiety is indeed anxiety in the face of ... but not in the face of this or that thing. Anxiety in the face of ... is always anxiety for ... is key for Heidegger. Nothingness is not an absence of something, but rather nothingness is a realm that which you can phenomenologically access, that which you can experience, but is a realm that is not conceptually available. But not for this or that. Then, so the indeterminateness of that in the face of which and for which we become anxious is no mere lack of determination, but rather the essential impossibility of determining it. In a familiar phrase, the indeterminateness comes to the fore, and basically you need that indeterminateness to detach yourself from the everyday meaning of life, from the average everydayness of Dasein, where everything is defined for you, and you are basically you can outsource your responsibility of being aware of your life from the authentic lens. So then in the following paragraph he says that anxiety reveals nothing, and by that nothing he means that unexplored territory which is rejected and neglected in the mode of the they, in the average everydayness. So this primordial anxiety that reveals nothing, that is, that which is rejected in the everydayness of Dasein, will help Barbie access authenticity. However, what's important here is to note that the authenticity that Heidegger is talking about has nothing to do with the prevailing French Sartrean interpretation of authenticity that is dominant in this film, namely authenticity as some form of individualism, whereby you get to define your life irrespective of what society says. Heideggerian authenticity can be collective in its sense. Heideggerian authenticity has to do with a form of realization about your being. And you might realize that your being has to do with the collective ethos of your people, and you might accord your life in keeping with with the ethos of your society. It's just authenticity for Heidegger is a form of self-awareness, whereby you can own your life by being aware of what you are doing without outsourcing it to the others, to the anyone, to the they. Gloria then, too, as the real protagonist of the film, gets the courage to look in the eyes of the nothing, namely that she is a weird person. And that weirdness that is about her, which she needs to hide from the everyday gaze of the they, is what is going to determine her authenticity. Namely that she now gets to admit it to her daughter, that she's a weird mother, that she's different, that her inner life is filled with anxiety, and that her let's say inner self is not as rule-based and organized and pedantic, and there is some form of darkness and discontinuity about her that they do not want to accept, as she has to let's say follow the social responsibilities of being the mother, having a career, and so on and so forth. And there is this nothing part about her that she has to suppress. And so you get the idea what Heidegger means by nothing. One smart commentator even suggests that, let's say, the plus sign in LGBTQ+, the plus sign is a Heideggerian plus. Plus as in Heideggerian nothing, that which underlies the everyday rationality of public. The multiplicity of LGBTQ plus has to do with that Heideggerian nothing. The underlying discontinuity and non-rational or irrational side of humanity that, let's say, this mental consciousness structure of Jean Gebser doesn't want to accept. The rational theoretical aspect, which tries to squeeze everything into binaries. So here we get to witness the replay or reworking of the myth that I already told about the goddess Kura and how human was created. Namely that now what is going to happen is that Gloria, by virtue of her accepting her inner self, confronting darkness, and her weird side that they doesn't want to accept, this acceptance and this confrontation with the primordial anxiety of the middle age crisis, let's say, will infuse Barbie with spirit and life. So basically here, there is a reversal, namely that if the outer appearance of the Barbie is due to an engineering mind which produces it with the help of technology, with the help of abstract thought, with the help of geometry, and so on and so forth, the inner side, the insideness of humanity, the spiritual aspect is being infused by Gloria's primordial anxiety, making a contrast between this outer organized pedantic side of Barbie and the inside dark, weird, discontinuous, let's say non-organized, non-pedantic, irrational as in beyond rational and irrational, the irrational side of the inner self. And here what's going to happen is that in order for one to come into life, you need to be infused with that Heideggerian nothing that basically Gloria projects it onto her, causing her to come into life. So this will be the first part of my analysis where I introduced basic concepts of Heidegger, and in the next part we are going to review a more political aspect of the Ken story. And we're also going to go in the in-depth explanation of the ending, whereby Barbie will fulfill this Western Promethean, let's say Faustian myth of the self-overcoming, where Slate is going to be cleaned and she will be incarnated into life without any prior abstract principles. So in the next part I will review the political side and the philosophy underlying the ending part.